All right. Hey there, this is Bram Kanstein, and you're listening to Bitcoin for Millennials. Together with my guests on this podcast, I go on a journey to discover how our current financial system works, why it's flawed, and why Bitcoin is the most relevant technology that you should understand and adopt. In this episode, I'm joined by Fred Krueger. He's a Bitcoin investor, professional trader, and entrepreneur with 10 successful exits. He holds a math PhD from Stanford and is a Wall Street veteran, having worked there in the 80s and 90s. He shares his opinions on Bitcoin on his popular X and recently created a YouTube channel, and never shies away of a discussion with other investors. So I'm happy to talk with him today. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you, Bram. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's awesome to meet people that I just know from Twitter. So that's always fun.
Same.
Yeah. So I have some questions for you, but first I wanted to ask, like, how do you experience talking about Bitcoin with your generational peers? Like, do you still try to educate them? Like, what's your experience there?
I mean, most of them have given up on, are not open to the idea of Bitcoin. So I would say most people that I worked with on Wall Street, very few of them have any interest at all in it. And most people think it's just some kind of Ponzi scheme, and it's bullshit, basically. That's kind of what most people think in my age bracket. But there are some notable exceptions, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have Larry Lepard, right? I think.
Yeah. Well, for example, Larry, I mean, he's very rare that people coming from the gold background transition to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people kind of once they're into gold for 20 years, they stay with gold. They don't transition.
Yeah.
So I would say, but I just think in general, people who have done well in the kind of the fiat world, right? They stay in the fiat world, and it's kind of rare to kind of change your mindset. Now Larry Fink has changed his mindset on Bitcoin, but
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not impossible, right? But it's definitely not the normal thing. I think.
Yeah, I agree. I tweeted before, like, for me, people, well, also like Greg Foss, I think Greg has in his bio like 35 years in a risk chair, he says.
Right.
And then I think, well, I'm 35, what do I know? Is then like kind of my take there, right? Like that I find it so interesting that like what you said, like people who've been in that world for a very long time, the fact that they can turn around almost a 180, right, and adopt Bitcoin, I think for me personally, that's a really big signal, because it's a really big like personal challenge, as you said. Like it's difficult to do.
Yeah, but I think a lot of them, even if they are accepting of it, they're accepting of it to the 5% of their portfolio, kind of accepting of it. You know what I mean? They're not full on Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
So I think it's really tough. When you've made it's easier when you haven't made a lot of money, right? But when you've made a bunch of money, for you to send millions of dollars to Coinbase to buy Bitcoin,
as well.
That's just, it's a tough thing. I did it, but it's tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's tough getting there. It's a lot easier if you bought it sort of cheaply and you just saved and it went up.
Yeah. And so, how do you now look back on like your Wall Street career, and now that you understand and know about Bitcoin, like how do you look back, but also how did you get introduced to Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013, right? So I saw it. I'm a tech guy, so I saw it pretty early, and I bought some, but I didn't think of it as being any more than just kind of a joke, really. Sort of like, okay, this is some kind of sort of interesting, vaguely interesting thing. I'll buy a few, see how it goes. And then I bought it, and then I sold it. So
same. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I didn't really think of it as being, like, I thought the chance of it taking off was pretty low, and really took for me until 2019 before I really kind of got it, I would say. And I certainly, I've been around it. I knew people around it. Friends of mine were into it, but like it didn't sort of click for me personally to the point where, okay, I'm actually gonna go out and buy a bunch of this thing. You know what I mean? Like that. And I think that's a personal thing. It's just like who you talk to, what it clicks for you. A lot of people have different, roads into it, right? It might be some kind of economic thing, like you think that inflation is going to take over. That wasn't really it for me, but I sort of got it in 2013. I mean 2019. That's kind of, and then after that I was sort of orange pilled and I added more, but
Nice,
it was sort of like right around a little bit 1 year before Sailor.
Well, you beat Sailor. Yeah. Well, I have the
Yeah.
same path, I think, and that is also what I like to, explore also in this podcast, because as you said, it's this personal discovery, right? Like I am also into Bitcoin from 2013. I bought at 400, I sold at 4,000, I felt great, but now I have less Bitcoin than before, and I saw all tweets of myself tweeting when it went to $100. I saw myself tweet it was a digital commodity, and I was like, damn, I got it, but I didn't get it. I understood it to some degree, but I didn't get it.
Well, I think the big thing for me, which is, I was really concerned right up until 2018 that something else was going to win, because I think that everybody in tech always sort of has this mentality that, MySpace is going to get displaced by Facebook, that AOL is going to get displaced by Yahoo, which is going to get displaced by Google. Mm-hmm. So we think of it as just pure technology, and you're always sort of thinking, well, there's something better that's going to come along, Why would I bet on this particular thing when there's something, this is slow, expensive, maybe there's going to be fast and cheap that comes along, So I was really of that opinion that fast and cheap would win over slow and expensive.
Yeah. Well, TCP/IP didn't get replaced, right? Like it's more on that level. How to look at it.
I mean, but there's a lot of other cryptocurrencies, right? So, there wasn't a lot of TCP/IP competitors.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but you do see the difference now, right? Like yeah.
So I definitely think that's, and I think still a lot of people on Wall Street just fundamentally, even if they say they're pro Bitcoin, fundamentally they may be like, well, wait a second, maybe Solana is going to take over, Avalanche or something. They really fundamentally they're open to that idea.
Yeah, I think that takes time to understand as to like which layer does this belong to, right? Should I look at this as a technology or as a startup creating a token that is fueling a certain ecosystem, or is Bitcoin just a totally different?
Right. I mean, I think it's sort of, I think if you think of this thing as a payment technology, you're missing it, right? You will miss it. You will miss exactly. You will miss what it is, right? Because you're like, okay, well, Venmo does really well. Venmo does pretty good. It works. PayPal works. And maybe stable coins are better than using Bitcoin, because stable coins is the dollar. It's if you're in Venezuela, the dollar seems pretty good. You know what I mean? So I think that the problem is, I think payment tech, you miss it, and I think the hard thing is realizing that it actually is a new form of money, and it's it's a new unit of account, and that's really the hard part, because I think it's so very counterintuitive that we even, why do we need a new unit of account? Like it's not clear, like living in America in particular, or Netherlands, right? Yeah. Why do I need to start, going from, the euro to this weird unit of account called Bitcoin? Why?
Well, that was actually my next question. Like, what what do you think is the main thing people need to learn before they can understand Bitcoin? Is it that the money that they are forced to use is not really designed to work for them, or like what would you say there?
Look, I've thought about it. Now my thesis is this, is that I think there's a couple things that Bitcoin does much better than regular money, right? And the first thing I think it does is it allows your money to be held in custody by yourself and moved wherever you want, right? And if you have euros and you move to America, your euros are basically useless. We do not accept the euro over here, right?
Yeah.
The dollar, my dollars in Netherlands are pretty useless, But Bitcoin is this unit where I can hold my Bitcoin in a wallet, and I can take that wallet anywhere I want in the world, right? And that's a fundamentally new thing, and I think that's actually the killer app of Bitcoin, right? Is that it's sort of it's money that you can hold, and you can move around the world, right? That's the first thing. I think it's just, and nothing has this, because fiat really has to be stored in a bank account, right?
Yeah.
And then there's some third party that's kind of gating it. Bitcoin can be stored, just in a wallet, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, I can send Bitcoin anywhere to anybody, anywhere in the world, without an intermediary either, right? So I don't need a checkbook to send it. I don't need a wire to send it. I can send it to anybody in the world. And again, that's a really new thing, right? Now, other cryptocurrencies have that capability, as they have the capability of the wallet, right? But I would think those two things are the things that are the biggest capabilities of crypto in general, right? And then the third thing is, this sort of finite supply, right? So, it cannot be debased. And I think between those things, I think you have something that is extremely powerful. And it's extremely powerful for people to keep their money out of the reach of the government.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the biggest, that's the core driver of Bitcoin's growth. Number one driver is, I want to take my money and I want to move it outside of the banking system. I want to move it outside of the government system. And
how much do you think people should understand that, like what you said, the finite supply, but also the issuance, right? It cannot be debased. Like that they have to understand how that is enforced, right? With all the incentives within the miners and
right.
And
so I think
nodes,
there's sort of two things, right? One is understanding crypto in general, right? Because Bitcoin works the same as all other cryptos, more or less, right? Whether it's Ethereum or anything, right? You have a wallet.
In usage, yes. In usage.
Yeah, in terms of the usage, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's also, why is this particular one special, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's really so the first thing is just, do you understand wallets, and do you understand seed phrases, and do you understand those things? Now that's the first step, right? So people have to get over that hump. Not obvious, right? Because people don't understand, where is my Bitcoin? Is it stored inside the ledger somewhere? Is it people don't understand that, right? They have a hard time even understanding what it is that is being
they're
stored.
Comparing it to an existing experience, right? Their their concept is, the money I see in my banking app is actually at my bank.
Here's a wallet,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This wallet has, I don't have any dollars in this wallet, but it can't have dollars. So if they leave, they're either in the wallet, they're out of the wallet, yes. But they're not in two wallets at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That doesn't exist with cash, right? It's in one wallet. But Bitcoin can be in three wallets at the same time. So, I think that's, from a conceptual level, a lot of people just don't understand that. And I think it takes a while to really understand that. to be honest. I don't, I think a lot of people, and Bitcoin is particularly tricky because they change you change the addresses. The setup of Bitcoin is a little odd, I would say.
Yeah, there's so many layers to understanding as to why
there's a lot of
features
subtleties
work
to what Bitcoin is, right?
Yeah.
So I think it takes takes a while, but then there's sort of the, okay, well, why is this different from, say, Solana, right? Well, there's no company behind it. There's no Solana Foundation. Bitcoin, there is kind of Bitcoin Foundation, but there's no foundation that's in charge of Bitcoin, right? So there's nobody who says, well, we're going to change the rules of Bitcoin. We're going to do this. So that's another whole layer that I think people get really, they have a hard time with. And I think, honestly, not that many people really understand it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But they understand that they do understand that the price is going up, and they understand that people are saying this is the one. And so, and they listen to people like you and me, and they're like, okay, these guys seem to be passionate about it. They seem to, be articulating that this is different from some other cryptocurrency. So,
And so how would you explain why this is such a big concept and the future of money? Like, why should people pay attention? I saw you tweet, something along the lines, and I'm maybe butchering, but, like, you have to pay attention. Like, you cannot miss this. Like, if you're missing this now, it's just your own, like,
right. Well,
not
look,
paying attention,
if we're right, if we Bitcoiners are right, and I think we are, right? But like, if this is going to become the future world money, right? Then if you don't get involved at year 15 of the future of world money, you kind of miss pretty much the biggest thing that's going to change the world economy, going forward. I don't see anything that's going to be bigger than that, right? Because if the entire money supply changes to a world where we're running Bitcoin, and if that happens within the next, say, 20 years, well, the difference between you not getting involved now and getting involved 20 years from now is, it's going to be completely night or day as to kind of whether you retire, for example. You know what I mean? You still may retire, but it's an amazing opportunity, right? What?
I wanted to say not as advertised.
Not as advertised.
Retire,
right?
But not as advertised.
You can still survive. I think you'll do fine, but like, it's probably the single biggest wealth creation event for people, especially your age. Is there's going to be one decision: did they get orange pilled or not?
Yeah. So why do you think it's so hard for people? I totally agree. What I sometimes think is the fact that we are living in a time where something so big is developing, that's already hard for people to like get, right? Like big things that happened in history, they are history. We read about them, right? They seem far away from us. We seem far removed from that. But the fact that we are actually living through it, I think sometimes that's also what drives people to kind of like ignoring it or saying like, yeah, well, you're talking in this big way. That doesn't really make sense, right? They are not able to wrap their head around the fact that this is the invention of a new, better money, basically, right? And something that creates...
which is sort of the cornerstone of kind of, government, economics, business, everything, right?
Yes.
So,
exactly.
that's the thing is like you said, well, so what? Money. Okay. So it's like a new PayPal. Okay. That's not going to change the world, right? A new PayPal is not going to change the world, right? But a new thing where everybody's going to be stuck to the system of like really honest money where governments can't print and where, everybody who does go into debt is going to, you just can't keep on racking up debts forever either. That's fundamentally going to change everything. So I think it's hard to, I think you can understand that it's going to happen, but I think it's so revolutionary that I think most people think, yeah, it can't possibly happen. Not in my lifetime, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're like, yeah. And I think, I was having this conversation on Spaces with some people from Europe, from England, and they're like, well, a lot of people in Europe sort of believe that the government's going to take care of them, right? Like, the government's going to provide my pension. The government's going to do this. Government's going to take care of me. And, I think that's probably an incorrect assumption. We're seeing that in the same thing in the US, government's going to pay for my Social Security. No, the government's not going to. There will not be any Social Security. That's just a lie,
For the
you're paying for it
in America for the next 300 years, probably, or maybe longer.
Sorry?
In America, probably for the next 300-400 years, if you look at how many trillion of unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
they can't. They just can't pay it. That's never going to be paid. And they can't. And those Medicare benefits and the Social Security benefits are not. They do not have money for that. And so the system is kind of bankrupt, but we're all pretending that it's not.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be a fundamental change to the system. And that change is coming, and Bitcoin's going to be part of that change, right? So it's a really big change, and I think a lot of people would rather, it's a little bit like thinking about your own death, right? It's not particularly pleasant thinking that you're not going to be around, 100 years from now, but you're not going to be around 100 years from now. You know what I mean?
Well, and it doesn't make it less true, right? So your feeling about it doesn't make
you're still. There's nobody has ever lived beyond 123 years old. That's the maximum a human being. And, we've had, 10 billion of us kind of walk the earth, and nobody's lived beyond 123 that's in recorded history. And look, I think this system is also going to fail. And if not thinking about it doesn't make it not happen. So it's going to happen, and kind of Bitcoin's your solution, and it's just a question of how much do you want to hedge your bets. Maybe you sort of say, well, okay, Fred, I kind of 10% believe you. Okay, great. Well, 10%'s probably enough. You don't need to be 100% believer. You just you need to be a little bit of a believer.
Yeah.
We're still sufficiently early that if you kind of believe a little bit, I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to put all your eggs in the Bitcoin basket, but it really makes no sense to have no coins, I think, at this point.
Yeah. I think the fact that this is so big, combined with the weird perception of people that it's too late and all these things, that I think that makes a lot of people not pay attention, right? Like, because Bram and Fred are talking about it. Yeah, they're only talking about it because they have Bitcoin. By the way, I always then think, right, of course, that is my skin in the game. It would be weird if I didn't have Bitcoin and talked about how good Bitcoin was. But anyway, the point is more like people think they are too late, but how are you too late to a new money, right? And that kind of ties into like how big can you think, or like how far can you zoom out?
I think part of the thing is, look, it's hard without looking at sort of quantitative numbers of how much this is catching on, and that's one of the things I've been kind of doing on Twitter recently is I've really been focusing on kind of trying to explain to people about these power laws, and not just about power laws of price, but like power laws of adoption, right? So, Bitcoin at the end of the day, it is growing almost exponentially. It's growing like a weed. Okay.
Yeah.
And basically, 25% a year there's more Bitcoin users every year. And it doesn't matter whether price is going up or down, the usage is increasing, right? And there's all these ways of measuring that. You can measure people who have 1 Bitcoin, or people who have 1/10 of a Bitcoin, or addresses that have 1/100th of a Bitcoin, or even addresses that have 10 Bitcoin. And you see these things are growing at sort of a geometric rate, right? And so there's, it really is, there is no uncertainty about it. It's just, this thing's growing. It's sort of like population growth in a country like, India, right? Mm-hmm. Population growth in Netherlands is not growing, but population in India is growing, or Mexico, it's growing every year. It's growing at, 7% a year. Yeah. And, I think we're dealing with sort of an inevitability of the growth and adoption of Bitcoin. That's really the basis. Now, this is also growing in terms of price. It's also growing in a very consistent way, but it's a little harder to really appreciate and understand that, because it's happening in this logarithmic kind of way. And we have very bad intuition for logarithmic growth.
Can you explain a bit on that? Like what is the main thing to understand?
Let's just say, if you ask most people who are not in Bitcoin, or even people who are in Bitcoin, you say, explain the price of Bitcoin. They'd be like, well, there was, back in the day, a long, long time ago, Bitcoin was really cheap, right? Like you were saying, right? 2013, it was like a couple $100, right? You could buy Bitcoin for $200, right? And then, so there was this prehistory where it was very cheap. And then in 2017, it kind of went from $1,000 to $20,000, right? Almost 20,000. Then it crashed. And then it was like dead. And then it went, in late 2020, it rose again from the dead, and it went to $60,000. And then it stayed there for about a year. It went down and went back up. It hit 60,000, 69,000 in the second peak. Then it crashed. And then it did nothing for 3 years. It died. And then last year it went back up. Well, that doesn't sound like a straight line at all, right? Like
no.
That's not, that sort of like sounds like a very risky kind of investment, that probably too risky for most people, right? Like, especially somebody my age, right? They'd be like, yeah, I don't need that. That sounds like way too much volatile, just complete risky casino, But if you look at it on logarithmic space and you say, great, let's look at the logarithm of Bitcoin price, right? Which the logarithm is a good way that you can put a graph of Bitcoin price over a very wide time scale, right? So from when Bitcoin was at 10 cents, right? So the logarithm is -1 at 10 cents, right? To right now, where Bitcoin, let's say it's roughly $100,000, not quite 100,000 yet, but 100,000 would be 10 to the power 6. So the logarithm of it in base 10 is 6. So you went from -1 to +6, right?
Yeah.
So you look at that, and now the trick is look at time also on a logarithmic basis. So look at time starting at the Genesis block, and 15 years from there. So 10 years, that's 1, right? Because 10 to the power 1, 10 to the power 1 is 10, right? And so, you start at 0, you go to a little bit beyond 1. Now you're at, 1.4, right? Or 1.3, And so if you look at time that way and the logarithm of price, now you see, whoa, it's a complete straight line.
Yeah.
It's very clear. Once you see it, you're like, I can't unsee that. It's completely a straight line. And now it wobbles around the straight line, but it's very clear that it's growing linearly. Not possible that it's random, right?
Yeah.
And I think, there's not that many people have seen that graph, including not that many Bitcoiners, right?
Yeah.
And so once you see that graph, you're like, oh, that's odd. why is this thing that went up from 10 cents to 100,000? So it went up 7 orders of magnitude, right?
Yeah.
How could something that grow up in such a consistent way? And the answer is it's a power law. It's part of these power laws that exist in nature all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And
so
yeah.
Sorry to ask you a question about it. Like I'm talking to Giovanni Santostasi
Oh, yeah, perfect.
in 2 days, so that's great. So we'll dive deeper. But I think the essence of the power law is like I think there's a great example, and I want to say it correctly, but I think it's like how the size of the heart of an animal is correlated to its weight or its size in a certain way, right? Like that eventually.
Yeah. So
also
if you look at
stuff like that,
if
or
you
like how
take
cities
the mass of an element of the mass of an animal, right, measured in kilograms, right?
Yeah.
And you measure the logarithm of the mass of an animal, and on the other axis, you put the metabolic rate, which is how much energy does that animal need to stay alive, right?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out you need 100 watts to stay alive. So you and I both require about the same amount of energy as a light bulb to keep going, right?
Yeah.
And all this food is just to produce 100 watts. That's it. That's what we do. But if you look at that relative to time, you'll see that it's a 3/4 power. So it's a sublinear growth, right? It's a sublinear power law. And so if you double the size of the animal, you do not double the you only increase the metabolic rate by 75%, right?
Yeah.
So the bigger the animal, the more efficient it is. And it actually works for, even like bacteria all the way up to like blue whales.
Yeah.
And
there's
also examples of line.
Yeah, and there's also examples of how cities grow and their GDP or
everything,
amount of businesses.
Yeah, like even number
like that,
of patents per capita, for example, things like that, right?
Wow. But
yeah,
and so the biggest question I have there, I think what I like about it, and it's also why I started talking to Giovanni. I saw his post on Reddit, and then
I'm happy that you're talking to him. It's great.
I went down the power law rabbit hole, which was
great,
fascinating. So, but what I find difficult with Bitcoin, and I hope to formulate the question right, like I see it as, of course, it's a network growing, right? It's a network of participants growing. So it's kind of like similar to perhaps kind of like Moore's law type-ish. But where does the power law of Bitcoin come from? Is that because it's basically like a mind virus? It's like a social adoption thing? Is it a human behavior type of element there? Or is it because Bitcoin is so rooted in math and physics as well, like just how that is engineered? Does it make any sense to identify those two, or like how do you see that? Because that's kind of the thing where I think
why would the number of patents per user, why would the number of patents increase sublinearly with the amount of users? It does, okay. Sorry, it's super linearly. So the amount of patents grows by 20%. It's true. It's a fact. It's a fact, right? Why is that? So why do these numbers show up? I don't know. It's just a normal growth kind of curve. Everything has either they grow sublinearly or superlinearly at some rate.
Yeah. But is it irrelevant then to talk about this human behavior? Because the one thing I think about with the power laws of Bitcoin, right? Let's say in this bull run, we go to 500K plus, right?
Yeah.
There will be a bigger number of people that will pay attention to Bitcoin because of that than the amount of people that did at 10 cents to $10 or whatever.
Probably not, but there will be. But
well,
not
that's
relative.
the point. That's the point, right?
Not on a percentage basis, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
So actually, what these power laws suggest is that there's nothing new under the sun, right? So everybody's like, well, ETFs are big, Fred. Like, I'm like, well, so was Mt. Gox when it came out, right? That was a big thing for Bitcoin to have an exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
But at that point, within that context, with that amount of users, you say like
exactly.
So it's not about the absolute numbers; it's more about the percentages. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
look, all these things are there. It doesn't really matter that there is now ETFs, or it seems like that it's just a general function of time that doesn't depend on anything else. There's only one variable in it, which is time. That's the only variable.
Yeah. So basically,
There's nothing else.
Yeah. So this is what Jeff Booth says, right? As long as it stays decentralized and secure, it will be chugging along, and people will adopt it as it goes. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's nothing you or I can do that's going to change that, or anybody else, or ETFs, or it's just a normal growth pattern, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like, the question is sort of, why is it a power law? Well, because I think it's kind of a natural type phenomena, right? It's a network type thing, but it's like cities are networks, or animals are networks. We're networks of cells, right? That's kind of what we are. We're we have all these little cells that make us up, trillions of them. And for those cells, we don't exist, right? They're just like, they're doing their own thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
And so Bitcoin itself is, the growth of Bitcoin as a store of value and stuff. It's just, it clearly has its own clear path, and other cryptocurrencies don't, right? So if you look at Litecoin, for example, the price of Litecoin is not a power law.
Okay.
Right. And I mean, the price of Litecoin is lower than it was in 2017 right now.
Yeah. And would you
the
agree that
adoption of Litecoin is not growing as a power law? So
yeah, But would you agree then? Do you agree then that the price is like a proxy of the adoption also, or not?
I think there's that's the crazy thing, which is that the price of Bitcoin was known to be a power law first, right? But then, the hash rate of Bitcoin is also a power law, and furthermore, the amount of the usage of Bitcoin is a power law. So there's power laws everywhere in Bitcoin. It's not just price. There's all kinds of power laws. In fact, there's even power laws of power laws. So if you look at the amount of Bitcoin, that the growth rate of Bitcoin, for Bitcoin wallets having 1 Bitcoin, 1/10 of a Bitcoin, 1/100th of a Bitcoin, etc., that's also a power law of Bitcoin. What I'm just trying to say is there's all these intrinsic power laws, which just tell you that you're looking at a network. You're looking at this growth of a network, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. And there's power laws at every single one of those points, right? Whether it's hash rate, whether it's usage, whether it's price, it's all connected.
And so what's the biggest difference with like the classic S-curve of technology adoption then here? Like, is that something we should let go? I mean, there's people that also follow that.
I mean, it's probably ultimately going to be an S-curve, right? But we're still in the very early phases, right? So, I would say roughly speaking of kind of like, how close are we to the end? 1%,
Yeah, we are at 1%, you mean? Yeah. So,
maybe not even 1%, right? So
I agree.
So when you look at
too early to talk about S-curve adoption then, but
right. Well, a friend of mine, Stephen Perrinode, he's an astrophysicist, right? And he's actually even modeled like S-curves that actually look like power laws in the very early phase. They're identical to power laws, and then they turn into S-curves, right? So you can model these things with an S-curve, but realistically, we're probably 10 years away from the S-curve stuff even starting to become an S. It looks like that, and then it sort of has an inflection point and it bends, right?
Yeah.
But we're not to that. We're not even to the. We're still in the very early phases. So we're 1% of the way in. I mean, realistically, yeah. And probably in terms of time, we probably have at least 1 decade before we stop power law growth at all. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to grow pretty much exponentially for the next decade. I mean, very close to exponential.
And would this be your main argument against people who say, you know, Bitcoin is too volatile to be a predictable store of value? It kind of depends on what your time frame is then, right?
I mean, I think it's sort of like this. It's sort of like, here's the thing. If you're looking at an asset that is sort of growing at some linear rate, right? And it's oscillating around this linear rate, I would say, yeah, it's way too volatile, right? Like, why would I want an asset if I said, okay, you can either invest in something that's going to go up 10% a year, almost guaranteed, right? Or you can get an asset that's going to grow 40% a year, plus or minus 40%. Now you're like, well, I'll take the 10%. I'll take the 10% for sure, right? Like my house on the canals in Netherlands, right? That thing's probably going to grow up 10% a year, maybe 7%, right? That sounds a lot safer than something that's might go down 40%, right? But that's not the correct way of looking at it. It's not like it's a linear thing that's going to be, it's actually an exponential thing, right? So because it's exponential, not linear, right? It's not just volatility around a linear path. It's volatility around an exponential path. So if somebody said, well, you have this exponential asset, which has some volatility around an exponential path. Do you want that? You should be like, of course I want that. It's great. Like, this thing's going to be the next Microsoft, right? I'm buying Microsoft in 1986. Great. Like, I don't care what the volatility is if I buy Microsoft at around 86. You know, Microsoft went up, 3,000 times from 1986 till now. You know, so Bitcoin it's on a very high growth trajectory, right? And it's not just a linear growth. It's going to grow a lot, compounded really high, right? So, this is something that's going to go up 10x, 20x from where we are now. And so because it's going to go up 10x, 20x, you're going to get a massive amount of volatility because it's growing at this super linear way, not just even x squared. It's growing at x to the power 6. So, if you see something that's growing at x to the power 6, you absolutely should own that thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's
it's just you just have to get it in your head. This thing's growing at x to the power 6. Okay, I'm going to own that thing.
That's huge. So what do you think about then? Last question about this: like people talk a lot about diminishing returns. Like if they look at the previous cycles, you see like there was like X 1000% up, then X 100% up, then like 110% up. Now, is that gonna go down? Because like in my mind, I think I think I don't know if they are going to go down, because at one point, if the adoption grows and people understand what this is, my logical reasoning is less people will sell into the boom and bust that will follow each other. Like how do you view that?
I can tell you what statistically it's doing, right? Statistically, the volatility, it's growing at an exponential rate. A quasi-exponential rate. So a power law is very similar to an exponential rate, except the exponential curve is growing down. So in 2017, the growth rate was 100%. Yeah. Now the growth rate's like 45%. Okay. In 20 years, the growth rate will be 20%. That's kind of what the power law tells you. So it's still going to be 30% growth in 10 years. So it's still so it's still going to be a very, very high growth thing for 10 years.
Yeah.
You're getting a very, very high growth thing. The volatility is going down a little bit, but not that much, right? So the volatility has gone from 0.3 in log terms to 0.25. Not even that much. So I think that realistically we can expect high volatility and high growth for the next decade. Yeah. And by the way, because we're now looking at these numbers on a much bigger scale, I think it's going to look like it's going to be crazy. I mean, it's going to be like Bitcoin went from 500,000 to 200,000. You know what I mean? That's going to appear like people are just not going to get their heads around that, because it's going to seem so crazy going from 500,000 to 200,000. But that's only, that's one standard deviation, right? That's like one standard deviation is I dropped by half.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not terrible. You know what I mean? Especially if I overshot on the upside, I might go from 500,000 to 125,000.
Yeah. I think that's what Giovanni says too, right? Like his downside is like half of the trend line, and his upside is like 1.5-ish or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we could go well above the trend line, right? We could go 2 times. There's twice we've gone 2x the trend line, which then puts a downside to 75% drop, right? Yeah. So you could go down, you could go up conceivably to 500,000, then drop to 125,000. It's really hard to get an intuitive number without looking at the actual math and looking at the thing in log space. Your intuition will be wrong all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great tool to help you remember what this is, right? To emphasize what this is, because I think you can study Bitcoin and you get to a certain understanding. I mean, this is what I do. Like I still feel it when the price goes down a bit, but then I just reiterate like, oh, this is the stuff I know and nothing's changed, right? Like nothing fundamentally changed.
Well, it's sort of like
with this, it's the same thing.
If you learn to fly a plane, you have to learn to trust the instruments a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or driving a car, you look at the speedometer, you look at like the RPM, you sort of say, you have to like trust a little bit in like, okay, this is what the past behavior, this is what I expect. Now I have to learn to trust the instruments a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're going to get freaked out. If you don't have any basis for this stuff, you're just gonna be like, okay, went down a lot. Yeah, looks like it's going to 0. I'm out.
Yeah. All right. So I have another subject. I saw you tweet about gold, and some people argue against Bitcoin and say, at least you can hold gold physically and you can store it physically. Like you cannot do that with Bitcoin. Like I would argue that Bitcoin is like metaphysical, but in fact it's also tangible because, it's verifiably, it's just math, and the fact that letters and numbers represent all the Bitcoin there is, like in some way it is tangible, and I can write down a private key with a pen on a paper, and that can represent real, like you can hold $1 billion in your hands. Like how do you view this when people say this? Like it
just seems to me the person who said that is the head of Goldman Sachs's wealth management unit.
Well, what else would he say?
It's like something is wrong if she thinks that you can't hold Bitcoin. To me, it's like, it's insane that somebody who has that position, right, who's advising literally trillions of dollars of money, that she does not understand even that you can hold Bitcoin in a wallet.
Yeah.
So it's the amount of just lack of understanding is just unbelievable to me.
But is this as a Wall Street veteran? Is this on purpose? Like, do they not understand? Like, I agree, right? Like, if this is your life, if this is your work, and there's a new form of money, that is adopted by your biggest competitors, in a sense, how I mean, I worked in TradFi as well. I cannot imagine there's a research team researching this, right? Like, are they so ignorant?
Yeah.
Really? Or is this just show?
Look,
like what else would they say? That's what I mean. Like,
there's a lot of people who don't like to get their hands dirty. I'll tell you a funny story. I sold a company to a social network, to Viacom. Okay. It was a pretty significant, amount of money, like mid 8 figures, And, and I talked to the CFO of Viacom's MTV, right? And I'm like, have you ever tried our product? And he's like, no. I'm like, he goes, no, I don't do that. I don't actually try things. And I'm like, I know, but I've been like in due diligence for like 6 months with you. We do all these meetings. You do this, dozens of lawyers, all this stuff. We've worked on all these fine prints of this stuff. Have you never even actually created a profile? I don't care if it's a real one under your own name or whatever. But have you? He goes, no, absolutely not. I'm not a guy doing social networking. And I think the same thing is true for Goldman Sachs. I mean, I guarantee you that woman has not created a Bitcoin wallet. Now, she can pontificate all she wants about Bitcoin wallets, but she doesn't know what a Bitcoin wallet is. She's never actually stored Bitcoin. Otherwise, she wouldn't be saying that. It's typical, I'll leave that to some younger people. They'll do the actual work. I'll just read some article, and I'll make some statements.
Yeah.
So,
but well, how do you view BlackRock getting into this? Like, my idea here is, I kind of see the Bitcoin adoption of, well, at least a part of Wall Street, kind of like a Trojan horse in a sense. Like, for me, it's very fascinating that a huge winner of the fiat financial system, is already one leg into this new money system. I mean, like, usually the winners move last, right? They milk their cash cow, and then they move on, kind of like, well, this Goldman Sachs lady or Vanguard, right? Like, these people, they're just pushing this away. But I think that's what British Huddle, I heard him once say, like, if you don't think there's like a team of 50 people figuring out what this Bitcoin thing is for the past 2 years or 5 years at BlackRock, you're crazy. And I definitely agree. Like, they totally understand what this is. Of course, they can make money off it, so they make a product for it, etc. But still, the fact that they actually moved here, for me, is a very big signal, because the winners usually move last, right? Like, so how do you see this comparison to like these firms that don't move and actually talk against it, and these other firms? Well, if you hear Larry Fink talk, it's wild.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, especially if you listen to him talk like 5 years ago.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So he completely has 180. Apparently it's some young guy working at BlackRock who orange pilled him.
Yeah.
Mitchnick. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, look, I think it's, it is like this. It's somebody, it's a personal thing. I think Larry Fink personally got it. He personally understood this stuff, whereas I don't think he personally understood it 5 years ago. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I do think he was orange pilled in the kind of conventional sense, and he was like, okay, and not just for Bitcoin, right? But I think, like, he has this idea of tokenization and stocks and so on, on the blockchain, which I don't think even is a bad idea longer term. But what I'm saying is, like, I think he realized that this is the future, and he better get on board and own this future.
Yeah.
Before somebody else decides to do it to him.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe easier in some sense for him that he's the founder of this firm, of course, and then the woman at Goldman Sachs or the CEO of Vanguard is not. So maybe there's also a different kind of like structure there, of course, as to how.
I mean, I've met Larry Fink. I mean, I actually worked for him for a day, so back in the day. So yeah. So look, I mean, he's a very, very smart guy, and he is he's a visionary, not just, and he's a visionary. He was a visionary in terms of financialization of assets, creating the first CMO. That was an absolutely masterful move, doing that with Lou Ranieri, who was at Solomon at the time where I was, and and then embracing ETFs, and buying iShares. He bought iShares from Barclay, right? So that was seeing that ETFs were the future was critical, right? And so I think it's similar to Bezos realizing that e-commerce is going to be huge, right? But when he did, I think he has the right view of, wait a second, what's the most important thing? ETFs are the most important thing. Boom. I'm gonna get in ETFs. I'm gonna provide super low cost friction ETFs for everything.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I mean, that's he saw that, he did that, right? And that's what kind of BlackRock made its mark, really, as the ETF superstore, right?
Well, and if you keep on this view of that you have of Larry Fink, like I have I don't know if it's a strange theory, but I have a certain theory, and maybe it's too big and it doesn't make sense. But what I'm thinking, from my point of view, but I think you can add to this, like the speculative attack story of George Soros and the Bank of England, right?
Yeah.
Larry Fink knows what's up with the dollar, I assume, right? He totally understands this, right? Would you say, could this already be like some sort of speculative attack on the dollar, in a sense that he has this like one leg in this new money system that, let's say, when the dollar actually breaks, that he is already with one leg in a certain lifeboat, which also gives him a certain amount of influence, right? I mean, yesterday we saw the U.S. government again sell 30,000 Bitcoin, like they're selling it like crazy. Could this be something like that?
Look, he knows more than anybody else, right? Because kind of when QE happened, right, and then when the latest kind of the latest version of QE came, they said, "Hey, BlackRock, you're going to do all the bond buying for us, right?" So he's got the front row seat, so he sees the problem way before we do, and much closer than we do. So yeah, I don't know if he's trying to attack the dollar so much as I think he has a better view of kind of the problems in the current system than anybody.
Yeah.
And I think I think he realizes that this is going to be a very, very significant asset class for the next 10 years. I think that these guys think 10 years in advance, and I think it's sort of like the Japanese used to do those, 5-year plans and stuff. I think they've now shifted. They're like, okay, Bitcoin and crypto, right? I think he's definitely thinking both. And, tokenization, let's see, if they don't allow ETH this year, fine. We'll just wait until next year or 2 years from now when they, maybe it's a new head of the SEC, maybe it's a new president, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that, I think he's in it for the long game, right?
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I think perhaps attack was
not really attack.
Was a too hard word. Was a too hard word, but it is a certain strategy against it, I'd say, if you adopt this new money, right? But it's just interesting to think about. I think it's just interesting. He moved anyway. So, for me, that's a big signal.
But I definitely think that if you had any question about whether it's going to be, is Bitcoin going to survive, the fact that BlackRock has put their stake in the ground tells you that 100% is going to survive. Like, there's no doubt in my mind, right?
Yeah, I agree. And this is also how I always saw Bitcoin. It was an experiment, I'd say, and it would go to zero, or it would be like the black hole value type theory, and it's not going to zero anymore. So I agree with that. But I think the outlook should be long, right? You should have like a long-term vision, and that's actually, I want to ask you a question about this because I saw you tweeted something that I really agreed with, and you said, I was a TradFi degan, like a degenerate, then slowly I kicked the habit, and instead of trading or making bets, I moved into long-term investing. I also saw that you had like a crypto related project before with a token. I mean, I made a crypto market research platform that failed before, like we dabbled around in this too. But how did you move from being a degan, a degenerate, to being like a long-term investor, etc.?
I built
what is
a
your lesson?
wallet for crypto, called Links. And so I was convinced back in 2018, 2019 that, if the sort of the multi-coin Solana type thesis, fast, super fast, blah, 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 is good. I'm still not anti-token or anti any of these things. I think, I'm not. I just think that I'm I'm a Bitcoin maximalist in that I think no other coin is going to be money, right? There's no possibility that people start having prices in ETH in the next 10 years. Nobody's going to do oil settlements in ETH. It's just not going to happen, right? Or Solana or anything else, right? Those are not going to become world money. They are going to be useful. There's a lot of use for some things like this. They're just not money, right? And so the way I look at it is, a lot of these things are actually useful for. I mean, even NFTs are people like them, right? They're useful. They can be used for art. They can be used for a lot of things potentially, right? We're still at the very beginning of that, and like Larry Fink's vision of tokenization. I have a friend who's doing, a property thing, Natalie, from Proppy, right? She's doing, real estate on the blockchain. It's still very early days, but she's doing it. She's, they've had apartment buildings or houses that have been sold, entirely, the whole chain of command is, title, everything on blockchain. So I'm not anti-token, and I think, a lot of people are saying, well, Fred, you're a maxi, you can't support other tokens. No, you can. It's just, I just don't think they're going to compete for money, right?
It's a different thing.
They're different thing, and it's this much smaller thing, right? Like, to me, like, creating a new form of money for the entire planet, well, that's a $100 trillion prize, right? Now, creating a token for NFTs, I don't know, maybe that's a couple 100 million, maybe, like if you're lucky, like OpenSea, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not to say it's bad. You can certainly do it. But I think it's not, I think that, you have to look at where is the eye on the prize, So I think, and I think the big prize is Bitcoin, right? That's the prize is money. Now, if you have 5% of your money is spread around a bunch of stuff, you buy some NFTs for art, do whatever you want, fine, great, do that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a maximalist in the kind of Spanish Inquisition sense of the word, I don't want to, like, sorry, man, you bought an NFT. Bad. Like, no, buy an NFT, buy a little ETH. So what? Use MetaMask. It's not the end of the world, right? But I don't think it's a great use of your money to invest, especially if somebody doesn't own any Bitcoin. If they're buying some meme coin or something else, it's kind of a mistake, right? Now, if you own a lot of Bitcoin and you're also, like, playing around, you want to do something else, you want to buy Dogecoin, fine, buy Dogecoin. You know what I mean? Like, have fun. Like, you
should view it in different ways. I think, like,
you have to view it in different ways, and also it's like, and the other part of being a degen is trying to time Bitcoin. Like, really bad idea, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Like trying to buy and sell Bitcoin constantly is just not a good idea, right?
But why do you think people are so degenerate with their money, or like on this gambling vibe in a sense? Like, why is that?
I think people seem to think that they can outsmart the market, and I think it's a combination of greed and fear. I think people think, oh, I'm going to be able to sell Bitcoin and then buy it back cheaper. Well, generally speaking,
I did that twice.
Yeah.
2 times, bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think generally speaking, if you sell it, you're probably not going to be able to buy it back cheaper.
Yeah.
Like, you probably think you will, but then it'll go down. Maybe it'll go down, but then you're going to be convince yourself that you shouldn't buy it until it goes back up above where you bought it, and then you're going to be like, oh, damn.
Yeah. 100%.
So I just don't. I think psychologically, it's a really bad idea to kind of actively trade this stuff. I don't think it's a terrible idea to spend your Bitcoin. Ultimately you're going to be spending it somehow, right? You're going to be using it to do something with it, right? But that's different than trying to sell it and buy it back, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm like, okay, great, now it's time for me to buy a house because I just got married and I need to sell a little bit of my Bitcoin to buy the house. Okay, well, sell a little bit of Bitcoin. I mean, you got to live. You got to, you know what I mean? I think that makes sense. And I think try to postpone it as much as you can, but also you're going to live. You're not living forever, anyways. So
that's true. But what would be your biggest tip for someone? Like, how can someone develop this long-term view and basically also like trust themselves with their understanding of, well, we're talking about Bitcoin, right? But at one point I think the goal is to get to that point.
Don't use leverage. Do not use leverage, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have too much of something, if you're using leverage, I think you're psychologically you can get wrecked too easily. The second thing is I wouldn't put all your money in Bitcoin. And the reason I say that is I still think your best percentage the best kind of percentage of your asset, like even fully invested, to me, I think that's like 70% Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Like even if I'm a young person, I would keep 30% in cash. I'd actually put it in like something super safe, like a bank account, And the reason is that there's always unexpected things in life, like whether it's, you get sick, you get hit by a car, something, something happens. You have a kid and the kid needs some operation or something, right?
Yeah.
And or you lose your job, right? And you have 3 months where you're not working, right? I think especially a lot of young people underestimate those risks. And those risks are real. So having cash that you can sell, that you can use beyond just Bitcoin is good, because you never know if something happens like that and you get caught in like 2022, you're going to sell all your Bitcoin, right, to pay for it.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
I don't think it's a great. I mean, I think you have to realize that things can happen, and it's good. And so, one of the things that I've done in my life is I've always had a very barbell strategy, where I have some stuff that's very risky, like a startup, right? And, that's risky and takes cash. And then I have a lot of cash on the side too, just because, I don't need to have, like, if you're 70% in Bitcoin, you can have all the rest in cash. No problem. You don't need to invest the rest. Put the rest in a bank account. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm at 90-10, so.
Okay, well, 90-10, look, if you can handle 90-10, good. It depends, like, if you have a job and you have everything else, 90-10 is probably okay. If you don't, if you're just like counting on this Bitcoin, I just think a lot of people are cutting it a little too close to the edge, And you have to, it's a personal decision, but that's I think a tip that I would say is don't don't try to optimize too much, and I would say, I think these power laws and stuff are good for giving people a little bit more perspective on like numbers.
Yeah.
Not for trading so much, but just like, like to give you a little bit of belief, to reinforce your belief that, wait a second, if I wait 5 years, is this thing really going to be much higher? Probably will, right? Probably it's going to be triple where it is today, or more. It may be quadruple, right? But like, I think a lot of that is just giving you the conviction that you need to hold something. Because no matter what, Bitcoin can go down 10% in a day, and we saw it the other day, right?
Yeah.
So things can move a lot, and not getting freaked out about it is I think. Now, having said that, I another tool is just dollar cost average. Like if you do have cash coming in regularly, well, great, just plop that cash into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's another good tool, because then you don't have to think about it too much, right? So it's like, oh, I just made $1,000. Great, I'll just put it in Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, just view it as a savings vehicle, right? Yeah, I
It
think
just like a savings vehicle, right?
yeah.
And
And
I
what
think
I
that
do
makes
to battle,
total sense especially for a young person right now. Like, I think that's a lot of that's a good thing. And I would say the other thing is just, and this is something I think you become more as a Bitcoiner. You start realizing that having Bitcoin is such a good thing to have, that you cut down on sort of stupid expenses.
Yes.
Right? Maybe I don't need a new car,
Yes.
Maybe I can live in my current, wherever I'm living, without upgrading that,
Yeah.
I mean, I
That's a
think
funny
buying a
side
house, for
effect.
example, is probably like, look, I own my house, but I wouldn't, if I was doing it right now today, and especially if I was younger, I would definitely rent for 5 years as opposed to buying a house right now.
Yeah.
I think
It's
that,
interesting that this is what a lot of people experience. This more the kind of like this frugality in some sense. They become more frugal, or at least more aware of what things cost, or what is the value of something that I buy. Like, does it add value to my life? Stuff like that. You become more aware
yeah,
of
and there's
that.
one other thing I would say is start thinking in Bitcoin.
Yeah. How
You know
much
what I mean?
Bitcoin is
Like,
this? Yeah.
don't think in terms of I have, so much dollars, but just
Mm-hmm.
think I've got so much. I got 3 Bitcoin. Okay, I got 3.1 Bitcoin. I just
Yeah.
I want to get to 4. Like, how do I get to 4? Like,
And also,
that's,
if you think about that big purchase, right? If you put
yeah.
that in, price that into Bitcoin.
I would definitely think in Bitcoin. I think that is a significant hack to helping people, And I think that's one of the big advantages of Bitcoin relative to other things, because nobody really thinks in Ethereum. Like, they don't think, they're like, oh, I got so much dollars of Ethereum. Nobody thinks of like, I got 20 Ether,
Yeah.
or I get 10,000, 4,000 Solana. It's just like, got so much dollars worth of Solana, right?
Yeah,
But like
exactly.
Bitcoin
Yeah.
is different because, Bitcoin is, it really is this unit, the units of Bitcoin. And the other thing I would say is definitely, and I know some people may not agree with this, but I would definitely get used to not buying and selling, but get used to using Bitcoin wallets and transacting with Bitcoin, even if it's small amounts. I think that's another thing I would recommend everybody do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And use Lightning, use Bitcoin wallets. Don't just put it in one thing and just forget about it.
Yeah.
I think getting involved a little bit, and you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to You don't have to go, looking for the one restaurant in your town that accepts Bitcoin. But it's not necessarily a bad idea to do that a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's fun to see the technology in action. I
Well,
try to use it.
Look, it's just sort of like you need to remember. It's one of these things. Is if you don't exercise, you lose muscle, right?
Mm.
And I think it's useful. Like it's useful to actually do trades and send people Bitcoin and send a friend Bitcoin. I owe you some money. Here, I'll give you some Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like people should remember this is a peer-to-peer transaction test. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I recommend people in the US, we have this Cash App thing here, and I say everybody should use Cash App and, get in the mode of stuff. And, you want to buy in, like, I'm in favor of these ordinals and stuff. You want to buy an ordinal or something, go do it, and you don't spend a lot of money, but just, get a little bit used to things, moving things in Bitcoin, familiarize yourself with mempool, understand how Bitcoin works. And I think that once you get in, I think you really, you don't want to go any other place, like you're like, I like the Bitcoin world. I like blocks. I like having a block. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I like checking block times. I like all these things. And all these things are part of Bitcoin to me. And I think, being part of that world and really being into that world and really understanding the difference between SegWit and Taproot and these type of addresses and, all this stuff will help you become a better Bitcoiner,
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that's, like I would use every single Lightning wallet that exists. I would test out 10 different wallets and, I'd, try moving some money between them,
Yeah.
Try different custody solution. Don't just do one and then just leave it and let it sit for 2 years and then realize you didn't actually store your words properly or something, So I think just usage is very important.
Yeah.
And, and join a Bitcoin meetup groups and,
Yeah.
Those things I think are important, and
yeah. I actually got my hairdresser onto Bitcoin, so now every time I go, I pay him in Bitcoin. So that's good.
See, that's the thing. It's not. Look, even paying somebody on-chain Bitcoin is not terrible. It's not. The fees are actually kind of reasonable right now. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I agree.
And so I'm, I think that.
The summary is study Bitcoin.
I love the whole ecosystem of Bitcoin. So like, there's nothing about any of it, part of it that I don't like,
Yeah.
And so, but I know there's a lot of people who, well, for example, we were doing this one space and, this guy, Gary Cardone, we had this bet and he lost this bet and this Bitcoin Beagle guy won. And then Gary's like, okay, he goes, okay, you're paying 100,000 sats. And he was like, I don't know how to send 100,000 sats. I'm like, wait a second. Like you have Bitcoin, right? And he goes, yeah, well, Coinbase, I don't like, okay, you got to learn how to send Bitcoin.
Yeah.
like you don't know how to send Bitcoin. You're not a Bitcoiner. I mean, what are you doing on a Bitcoin space? Talking about Bitcoin for hours on the end. When you actually can't, if you can't send somebody 100,000 sats like that, you need to do your homework a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it's the summary is like study Bitcoin in breadth and depth, right? And you try everything out, and I think that's also, well, for me, it's what's fun. It's like I'm learning every day. Still, this is such a huge thing, and so every day there's a new topic to learn or a thing to try out. So that's always just very rewarding.
There's a lot of cool tools out there, and there's a lot of there's a lot of good projects and cool tools, and it's interesting too. And I think that part of it is if you stay interested in these things, you become a better holder of this stuff. because it's like, okay, this is kind of what this is all relates to my passion, which is this Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think.
All right, Fred. To wrap up, the last question.
Yeah.
Can I ask everyone the same question?
Oh,
what is a core belief you will never let go?
A core belief that I will never let go. A core belief about Bitcoin?
Anything?
Okay. I think my core belief is that you really need to do it yourself. You need to be hands-on, and you have to make up your own mind and not accept other people's opinion, but just make up your own mind about these things. Like, it's not good enough to be like, well, Saylor said it, or so-and-so said it, or Fred said it, or Fred said power law. Like, no, you should 100% convince yourself of whatever you're thinking. But you have to go through all the work yourself, and you have to convince yourself, and you should make up your own mind, because that's the only way you're going to have really strong convictions, I think.
Love that. Yeah.
So that's kind of what
couldn't agree more, I'd say.
Yeah.
Well, this is also what Bitcoin invites you to do, right? I think that's the whole point. Like, you don't have to believe what people like us say about Bitcoin. The entire idea is that we invite you so you can study it, because it's so transparent that you don't have to believe us. That's the entire point, right? But you have to do that work, as you said.
Well,
like,
that's why I love it so much, because it's just well, from my perspective, it's so mathematical. It's just so transparent.
Yeah.
And I love that every little thing is like even in Ethereum, they're not even sure how many Ether there are. Nobody's even sure. Like, something's wrong with that system, right? When they can't even tell you how many there is,
Yeah, and they're changing it again. Well,
and they're changing it. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, there's something fundamentally wrong. But Bitcoin, it's black and white, and there's no sort of real mysteries there. It's all, there's mysteries as to why it's working the way it is, and like, it is kind of, it almost feels like it's an alien force. It's like this thing was created and it's just working so well, and it's taking over the world in such a way. I don't know why that is exactly. Why is it so? It just seems like it was created once, one code, changed a little bit, but not much.
Yeah. I think it's because it just works. It sounds so stupid,
I agree,
but
it
works, and everyone can check it out. And I think, maybe to add to what you said, like, if you're studying Bitcoin, like, one of the things to keep an eye on is, the halving that's coming up. That's not just
definitely.
like, the block rewards are split in half, but this is actually like a celebration of the fact that we can trust the rules that are set out for this monetary system, right? If the halving happens on the date that we predict, that actually shows you that the monetary policy of this system is true and enforced and adopted by everyone who uses it, right? That's the entire point. And I think that's a nice illustration of, I think, what we studied and now believe in. So,
well, Bram,
thanks
it's
so much.
Great talking to you. And if I'm ever in Netherlands, I'll look you up.
Hit me up.
And if you're ever in LA, let's come by.
Let's do it. Well, thanks so much for your time in this conversation, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay,
Cheers.
thanks, Bram.
Thank you.